There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a house when someone is gone forever. It's not just an absence of sound. It's heavier than that. It's a presence in itself, a weight in the air that presses down on you in the quiet moments. It's in the dust motes that dance in the afternoon sun, undisturbed by passing feet. It's in the floorboards that no longer creak under a familiar, heavy tread. For 20 years, that silence has been my most constant companion. For 20 years, it has been the shape of my father. 20 years is a lifetime, long enough for a child to become a man, long enough for the sharp, jagged edges of grief to be worn smooth, not by healing, but by the relentless erosion of time. 20 years since my father, Senior Park Ranger Thomas Thorne, laced up his boots, shrugged on his pack, and walked into the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the Ash Creek National Forest. He walked in and he never walked out. He was a man made of maps and sunlight. His hands were a cartography of his life, calloused from axes and shovels, scarred by barbed wire and the occasional foolish fish hook, yet gentle enough to teach a 5-year-old boy how to properly hold a fledgling that had fallen from its nest. The scent I remember most vividly from my childhood is the one that clung to his canvas work jacket. A complex mixture of pine sap, damp earth, sawdust, and strong, black coffee. He was the most grounded man I ever knew, his certainties as solid and reliable as the granite peaks he patrolled. The wilderness wasn't an adversary to him. It was a conversation, a place of profound and complex truths that he was privileged to listen to. He believed every mystery in the forest had a rational explanation: animal behavior, weather patterns, geology. He didn't believe in monsters. He believed in consequences. The official report is a thin, dry document, its pages yellowed with age. Tells a simple, tragic story. Ranger Thomas Thorne, age 42, began a routine 3-day solo patrol of the Northern Ridge sector on October 3, 1999. A sudden, unforecasted storm system moved in on the second night. The search and rescue operation, hampered by gale-force winds and torrential rain, began 48 hours later. They searched for 3 weeks. Helicopters saw nothing but an unbroken canopy of trees. Ground teams found nothing. Not a boot print, not a discarded ration wrapper, not a single thread from his uniform. It was as if the forest had simply erased him. The conclusion was tidy: lost and presumed deceased, victim of exposure to the elements. A tragic accident. A cautionary tale for new rangers. Case closed. But it's hard to grieve a ghost. It's hard to find closure when there is no final chapter, just a sentence that trails off into nothing. The world moved on. The Park Service named a small footbridge after him. My mother, after years of waiting by the window, finally sold our house at the edge of the park and moved to the city, away from the constant, silent reminder of the woods that had stolen her husband. But I never could. The question mark he left behind was too large. It shaped the man I became: quieter, more watchful, always feeling like I was on the edge of a story I didn't understand. The answer, or at least the beginning of one, came 3 months ago. My mother passed away, and the duty fell to me to finally clear out the last of our family's history from the attic of our old home, a place I'd consciously avoided for 2 decades. The air up there was thick and still, smelling of old paper, cedar, and forgotten time. Sunlight struggled through a single, grimy window, illuminating a graveyard of memories. Stacks of old magazines, boxes of my childhood toys, my mother's wedding dress sealed in a yellowed plastic box. And there, tucked away under the eaves, covered by a dusty canvas tarp, was his old service footlocker. A heavy, olive-drab metal box with Thorne stenciled in white on the side. I hadn't seen it since I was a kid. I ran my fingers over the cool, rough metal. My heart began to beat a little faster. a nervous, insistent rhythm against my ribs. The latches were stiff, but they opened with a loud, metallic click that echoed in the profound silence of the attic. The sound of opening a tomb. Inside, it was a time capsule of the man he was, his neatly folded service flag, a framed commendation for his role in the '94 wildfire containment, old photographs, him and my mother on their wedding day, him holding me on his shoulders, a wide, proud grin on his face, and beneath it all something else, a small, leather-bound book. It was a standard-issue Ranger Field Journal. The leather cover was dark with age and worn smooth by the constant pressure of his hands. The spine was cracked, the pages warped as if they'd been damp at some point. It smelled faintly of him of campfire smoke, leather, and something else, something sharp and electric, like ozone after a thunderstorm. I sat there on the dusty floorboards of the attic, and I began to read. For the first 100 pages, it was exactly what I expected. It was my father distilled onto paper. His handwriting was neat, methodical, economical. May 12, 1998. Repaired footbridge over Miller's Creek. Signs of heavy bear activity in the berry patches to the west. Posted advisory at the trailhead. Saw a doe with 2 fawns. Air clear, visibility excellent. July 3, 1998. Cleared a fallen fir blocking the East Fork Trail. Assisted a family of hikers from Ohio who had underestimated the climb. Gave them my spare water. Reminder, always pack extra. It was him. Practical. Observant. Professional. It was mundane. It was normal. It was comforting. I read for hours, losing myself in the simple, solid reality of his life. And then I reached the final section, the last 10 pages. The ink on the page seemed to change. It was darker, pressed harder into the paper, as if written with a desperate urgency. The entries detailing his final patrol. It started normally enough. October 3, 1999, 0800 hours. Begin patrol Kawano Valley Trail. Weather clear, crisp. Air feels charged today. Strange sensation. Almost a hum in the fillings of my teeth. Probably just the coming autumn. First leg is a standard 8-mile hike to the Oakhaven Creek campsite. All seems normal. The usual chatter of jays and squirrels. Nothing out of the ordinary. Even then, a small note of strangeness. Charged. My father was not a man for fanciful descriptions. I kept reading. The next entry was from that evening, and the tone had shifted. The neat, efficient script was starting to fray at the edges. October 3, 1999, 1900 hours. Camp established at Oakhaven. Something is wrong. The woods have gone completely silent. Not the usual evening quiet that settles in. This is a dead silence. A vacuum. No crickets. No owls. Not even the rustle of wind in the canopy. It's like the entire forest is holding its breath, listening for something. And there's a smell. Faint. Like ozone after a lightning strike, but mixed with something else. Something spoiled. Like old meat left in the sun. Checked the perimeter twice. No tracks. No sign of a predator. But the feeling remains. This place feels occupied. I'll be glad for the dawn. My own breath caught in my throat as I read. This was not the language of a park ranger documenting trail conditions. This was the language of fear. The last entry for that night was scribbled, almost illegible. 2,300 hours. There's whistling, coming from the woods. Sounds like a man. No tune, just a wandering, aimless whistle. It's been circling the camp for an hour, getting closer, then fading away. I called out. No response. This is not a lost hiker. There's a rule out here I heard from the old-timers. An old tribal superstition. Never answer a whistle in the dark. I always thought it was nonsense. Tonight I'm not so sure. The entries for the next day, October 4th, were even more disturbing. His journey took him higher, up the northern ridge, and the world he described was one that was actively unraveling. October 4th, 1999, 0900 hours. Leaving Oakhaven. No sleep. The whistling stopped just before dawn. The smell is stronger this morning. The woods feel wrong. Sick. The birds are gone. I haven't seen a squirrel or a chipmunk since yesterday. It feels like the life is being systematically drained from this valley. I found something new. There are symbols carved into the trees. A circle with a vertical line through it, and 3 smaller circles at its base. They look fresh. The sap is still weeping. I feel like I'm being warned. Or guided. I don't know which is worse. I read on, my horror mounting with every word. He wrote of a constant, oppressive feeling of being watched. Of a clicking sound at night, like stones being struck together. Of shadows that seemed to move with their own volition at the edge of his campfire. The official report mentioned a storm. My father never mentioned a storm. He was describing something else entirely. A different kind of storm. The final entry in the journal was a barely coherent scrawl, the pen strokes digging into the paper. It was dated October 5th. He had been in that forest for 2 days. October 5th, 1999. I'm at a cabin. An old trapper's cabin not on any modern map. The humming is coming from inside. The smell is here. It's not an animal. I saw it. I saw the shape of it. Too tall. It doesn't belong here. It doesn't belong anywhere. The symbols are its name. This place is its den. I should not have come. But I have to know what has been hunting this valley. I am a ranger. It is my duty to know. I'm going inside. Forgive me, Mary. Tell Alex. The sentence was never finished. The rest of the page was blank. The pages after it all blank. I sat there in the silence of the attic, the journal lying open in my lap. The sun had set, and the room was filled with deep shadows. The authorities at the time had seen these entries. They had a copy in the official file. They had dismissed them. The ramblings of a man lost in a storm, succumbing to delirium and hypothermia, was the official assessment. A desperate, terrified mind inventing monsters in the dark. And for a logical person, that explanation makes sense. It's the only thing that makes sense. But I know my father. I know his mind. He was the most grounded, rational man I have ever known. He could navigate by the stars and tell the time of day by the position of the sun. He would not get lost. He would not panic. And he would not invent monsters. He would document what he saw, no matter how impossible. That night, for the first time in 20 years, the silence in the house had a voice. It was the voice from the journal, whispering of impossible things. A question that had been dormant for 2 decades roared back to life. What really happened in the Kawano Valley? What did my father find in that cabin? The decision formed slowly over the next few weeks. A quiet, cold certainty that settled in my bones. I had to go. I had to see it for myself. I told my friends my plan. They thought I was having a breakdown, a delayed reaction to my mother's passing. Alex, it's a grief-fueled obsession, my best friend Mark told me, his face etched with concern. He's gone. You need to let him go. Don't go chasing ghosts into the same woods that killed him. I tried to show them the journal, but they saw what the authorities saw, the sad, final words of a dying man. They didn't see what I saw. I saw a warning, a testimony, a map, so I began to prepare. I spent weeks poring over old topographical maps, comparing them to the patrol route outlined in the journal. I bought the best modern gear I could find. A lightweight tent, a sub-zero sleeping bag, A GPS unit with satellite messaging capabilities, all the things my father didn't have. All the things that might have saved him. But my most important pieces of gear were old. His heavy, brass compass, its needle still true. And the journal itself, sealed in 3 layers of waterproof bags, resting in an inner pocket of my jacket. Which brings me to now. I'm standing where he once stood. The trailhead of the Kawano Valley Trail. The air here is different, just as he described. It's heavy, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. But there's an undercurrent I can't quite place. A metallic, almost electric tang that makes the hairs on my arms stand up. The wooden sign is weathered and green with moss. The carved letters barely legible. Place of Echoes. They say this is foolish. A suicide mission. Maybe it is. My friends think I'm coming out here to find his remains, to finally bring him home and give him a proper burial. Perhaps that's how this started. But somewhere along the way that changed. Staring into the deep, silent maw of the forest, with his last words burning in my memory, I know the truth. I'm not looking for a body anymore. I'm looking for an answer. And I have a terrible, sinking feeling that the only place to find it is at the end of his last trail. My pack is on. His compass is in my hand. The journal is resting against my chest. It's time to go. This is the protocol for the lost, and I'm going to follow it to the very end. The first step is the hardest. It's a physical commitment to a decision your mind has been wrestling with for months. One step and I have crossed a threshold. I am no longer a man thinking about his father's last journey. I am a man actively walking it. The air changes instantly. The vague ambient sounds of the distant highway, the last vestiges of the world I know, are cut off as if by a closing door. I am inside now. The weight of the pack on my shoulders is immense. 60 pounds of modern survival gear, a tangible burden. But it's nothing compared to the invisible weight I carry. 20 years of unanswered questions, of grief held in suspension, of a son's longing for a father who simply vanished. Every piece of equipment, from the satellite messenger that promises a lifeline he never had, to the high-lumen headlamp that mocks the darkness he faced with only a battery-powered lantern, feels like an argument I'm having with the past. The trail itself, in these initial stages, is disarmingly benign. It's wide and well-trodden, carpeted with a soft layer of pine needles that muffles my footsteps. Sunlight, a commodity that I suspect will become increasingly scarce, filters down through the high canopy in beautiful, ethereal shafts. It illuminates a world of vibrant, almost aggressive green. Ferns unfurl in intricate spirals from the damp earth, and moss hangs from the bark of ancient Douglas firs like the long, green beard of a sleeping giant. It's beautiful. It's the kind of profound, untamed beauty my father dedicated his life to protecting. The kind of place he loved. But I can't appreciate it. Not really. My senses are on a razor's edge. I'm not seeing a forest. I'm scanning a crime scene, 20 years cold. Every rustle in the undergrowth makes my head snap around. Every bird call seems to hold a cryptic meaning. I'm searching for something, a sign, an echo of his passing. The Kawano Valley, place of echoes. The name from the old tribal maps feels less like a geographic descriptor and more like a statement of purpose. I walk for what must be 2 hours, pushing a steady, determined pace. I am alone. I've seen no one else on the trail, no other cars in the small gravel lot. This sector of the park has a reputation. It's known for its rugged terrain and unpredictable weather. After my father's disappearance, that reputation solidified into something darker, more superstitious. The other rangers, even now, patrol it in pairs and never for more than a day. They call it going on thorn duty, a gallows humor tribute that always felt like a twisting knife in my gut. Around midday, The sound of running water grows from a faint whisper to a steady murmur. I round a bend and find myself at a small, clear stream that cuts across the trail. A simple log bridge, gray and weathered, allows for passage. I slip the heavy pack from my shoulders, leaning it against the thick trunk of a cedar tree. The relief is immediate, a sudden lightness in my bones. I sit on a large, sun-warmed boulder by the water's edge and pull out a protein bar and my water bottle. The food is dense and tasteless, but it's fuel. As I eat, I carefully retrieve the journal. The leather cover feels familiar in my hands, a direct link to him. I open it to the first entry of his final patrol, the words I've now memorized. October 3rd, 1999. 0800 hours. Begin patrol, Kawano Valley Trail. Weather clear, crisp. Air feels charged today. Strange sensation. Almost a hum in the fillings of my teeth. Probably just the coming autumn. First leg is a standard 8-mile hike to the Oakhaven Creek campsite. All seems normal. The usual chatter of jays and squirrels. Nothing out of the ordinary. I look around me. This is the place. He stood here. He breathed the same air. I close my eyes and try to feel what he felt. Charged is a strange, specific word. The air is clear. The sun is warm. The stream makes a gentle, soothing sound. It's idyllic, peaceful. Yet he wasn't wrong. Now that I'm sitting still, now that I'm truly listening, I can feel it. It's not a sound, but a feeling. A low-level static in the atmosphere. A faint, almost subliminal vibration that seems to hang in the air itself. It's the kind of feeling you get just before a big storm, when the sky is still blue but the world seems to be holding its breath. There is no storm forecast for today. I finish my meal, the peaceful scene now tainted by that single, unsettling word from the past. I pack my things and press on. From here, the trail begins a gradual but relentless ascent. The character of the forest begins to change subtly at first, then more dramatically. The path narrows, the well-trodden earth giving way to a more rugged track littered with rocks and roots that seem perfectly placed to trip you. The trees, mostly fir and pine, here begin to grow closer together. Their branches interlock high above, weaving a dense ceiling that the sunlight struggles to penetrate. The world becomes a dimmer, greener, more claustrophobic place. It's colder here out of the sun. I can feel the temperature drop by several degrees. The cheerful chatter of jays and squirrels that had accompanied my first few miles has faded away. The forest is quieter now. I find myself glancing over my shoulder, a primal prickle of unease on the back of my neck. The feeling of being watched. It's a common trick of the mind in the wilderness, a primal instinct left over from a time when we were prey, not predators. My father taught me that. He taught me to acknowledge the feeling, analyze it, and then dismiss it if no rational threat was present. But he also taught me to always trust my instincts. The paradox is not lost on me, and it offers no comfort. I walk for another 3 hours, climbing steadily. The silence deepens. The only sounds are my own labored breathing, the crunch of my boots on the trail, and the rhythmic thump-thump of my own heart. It feels like I've stepped out of the living world and into a photograph of a forest. A perfect, beautiful, but utterly lifeless replica. Late in the afternoon, just as my leg muscles are beginning to burn with a steady ache, I see it. Through a break in the trees, a small, level clearing. In the center is a dark circle of stones, choked with weeds and moss. A fire pit. A faded, tilting wooden sign next to it reads, Oakhaven Creek Campsite. I've arrived. I drop my pack in the center of the clearing with a heavy thud. A wave of profound exhaustion washes over me, more emotional than physical. I'm here. This is it. The first waypoint on his final map. I feel a strange and somber sense of reverence, as if I'm walking on sacred ground. In a way, I am. I'm standing in the exact spot where the story began to change, where my father's world began to tilt off its axis. I go about the business of setting up camp with a slow, deliberate purposefulness. The familiar rituals are a comfort, an anchor in this deeply unsettling place. Unpacking the tent, laying out the ground sheet, snapping the poles into place. The crisp, synthetic sounds of modern gear seem loud and intrusive in the oppressive quiet. I set up my small backpacking stove to boil some water for a dehydrated meal. I will not make a fire. Not tonight. I want to hear the forest, or more accurately, its silence. As dusk begins its slow, creeping invasion of the day, bleeding purple and orange through the dense web of branches, I sit on a log near the old fire pit and eat my meal. The freeze-dried spaghetti tastes like cardboard and regret, but I force myself to eat it, knowing I need the calories. The air grows colder. Mist begins to rise from the damp ground, swirling around my boots like curious ghosts. It's time. I pull out the journal again, my hands feeling strangely clumsy. I turn the page to his next entry. October 3rd, 1999. 1900 hours. Camp established at Oakhaven. Something is wrong. The woods have gone completely silent. Not the usual evening quiet that settles in. This is a dead silence. A vacuum. No crickets. No owls. Not even the rustle of wind in the canopy. It's like the entire forest is holding its breath, listening for something. And there's a smell. Faint. Like ozone after a lightning strike, but mixed with something else. Something spoiled. Like old meat left in the sun. Checked the perimeter twice. No tracks. No sign of a predator. But the feeling remains. This place feels occupied. I'll be glad for the dawn. I put the journal down, my appetite completely gone. I sit perfectly still and I listen. He wasn't exaggerating. He wasn't delirious. He was right. The silence is absolute. I hadn't noticed it consciously before, my mind so focused on the trail, on reaching this spot. But now, sitting in the heart of it, it's a physical presence. Presses in on me. There are no crickets tuning up their nightly orchestra. There are no night birds calling out to one another. I can't even hear the wind. The trees stand as still as stone columns in a forgotten tomb. The silence is so profound that I can hear the blood pulsing in my own ears. It is the most unnatural quiet I have ever experienced. It is the sound of a world that has been muted. My fear, which had been a low hum in the background all day, now cranks itself up into a piercing shriek. I stand up and walk to the edge of the small clearing, my headlamp switched on. Its powerful LED beam cuts a sharp, nervous cone into the oppressive, ink-black darkness that surrounds me. The trees are no longer trees. They are black monoliths, their shapes indistinct, forming a solid wall just beyond the reach of my light. I pan the beam back and forth, sweeping it along the treeline. The beam catches on the wet leaves, making them glisten like a million watching eyes. Did something move? A flicker of movement at the very edge of the beam? I freeze, every muscle tensed, straining my eyes. Nothing. Just the play of shadows, my own overstimulated mind painting monsters in the dark. I tell myself that. I repeat it like a mantra, but then I hear it. It's so faint at first, I think I'm imagining it. A soft, whispery sound, carried on the dead-still air. It's not the wind. It's rhythmic. It's melodic. In a strange, wandering way. It sounds like someone whistling. My blood turns to ice water in my veins. It's a simple, tuneless whistle. A lazy, meandering sound, like someone whistling to themselves while they walk, utterly unconcerned. It seems to be coming from deep within the woods to my left. Then it fades slightly and seems to be coming from in front of me. It's moving, circling the camp. My mind flashes back to my childhood. My father, a habitual whistler. He'd whistle old folk tunes and TV theme songs while he worked in his woodshop, while he cleaned his gear, while he drove his Ranger truck. It was the background music to my early life. But this is not one of his tunes. This is aimless. And it's out there, in that suffocating, silent darkness. I back away slowly from the edge of the clearing, my hand reaching down and closing around the cold, reassuring handle of the hatchet looped to my belt. The whistling continues for another minute, maybe two, though it feels like an hour. A casual, almost mocking sound that seems to be exploring the perimeter of my camp. And then, as suddenly and inexplicably as it began, it stops. The silence that rushes back in to fill the void is 1,000 times worse than the sound it replaced. It is no longer an empty silence. It is a waiting silence. The silence of something that knows you're there. I stumble backward and practically dive into my tent, fumbling with the zipper, my hands shaking so badly it takes me 3 tries to pull it shut. I zip it up so tightly the fabric strains against the teeth. I sit there in the cramped darkness, my heart feeling like it's trying to beat its way out of my chest. I switch off my headlamp, plunging myself into total blackness. My tent walls are a thin, fragile shield of nylon. It feels about as protective as a paper bag. I don't know how long I sit there, a statue carved from pure fear, listening for a footstep, for the sound of the zipper being tested from the outside. But nothing comes, only the crushing, expectant silence. After what feels like a lifetime, I force my trembling hands to move. I pull out the journal again. It's my only source of counsel, my only companion in this terrifying, lonely place. I switch my headlamp back on, the sudden light making me flinch, and I turn the page. There's one more short entry for that night. His handwriting is a chaotic scrawl, words jammed together, letters misshapen. October 3rd, 1999, 2,300 hours. The whistling started an hour ago. It's still going. Sounds so close now. I called out. No response. This is not a hiker. This is something else. There's a rule out here I heard from the old-timers. An old tribal superstition. Never answer a whistle in the dark. I always thought it was nonsense. Tonight I'm not so sure. My heart sinks into the pit of my stomach. A cold, heavy stone. A rule. A protocol for a situation that shouldn't exist. My father heard it too. He sat in the same clearing 20 years ago, listening to the same impossible sound, feeling the same specific tailored terror. This isn't a coincidence. This isn't my mind playing tricks on me. This is a reenactment, and I am playing my father's part. The whistle wasn't a random event. It was the first whisper in a conversation I'm only just beginning to comprehend. A conversation that started 20 years ago and is, apparently, still waiting for an answer. And I am alone, in the dark, with the terrible knowledge that the first rule of this place is one I am now bound to obey. I didn't sleep. That word, sleep, seems like a joke now, a concept from a different life. How could I? Every creak of a branch under its own weight, every rustle of a dead leaf skittering across the ground was magnified by the darkness and the silence into a monstrous threat. My imagination, a wild and terrified animal let loose from its cage, conjured the image of a face at my tent wall, a pale, whistling face, its lips pursed in that tuneless, mocking melody. I lay in my sleeping bag, not for warmth, but for the illusion of a barrier, my hand clamped around my hatchet until my knuckles were white. Sleep was not a reprieve. It was a battle I had already lost before it began. I kept expecting the whistling to start again. I waited for it, listening with an intensity that made my ears ache. I was certain it would be a prelude to something more physical, something final, the sound of tearing nylon, a violent and incomprehensible end in the dark. But nothing came, only the crushing, expectant silence. A silence that felt like it was actively listening to me. Dawn arrived not as a gentle awakening, but as a pardon from a death sentence. The first hint of gray light, filtering weakly through the thin tent fabric, was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was permission to move, permission to breathe again. I scrambled out of the tent into the cold, damp morning air. The world was wreathed in a thin, low-lying mist that clung to the clearing, making the trees at its edge look like fuzzy, indistinct specters. The silence remained, but it felt different in the light. Less menacing, more melancholy. The silence of an empty stage after a terrifying play has ended. I packed my camp with a frantic, clumsy haste that would have horrified my father, the meticulous ranger. I didn't bother with the stove. I chewed on another dry protein bar, my eyes constantly scanning the silent woods around me. I circled the clearing twice, my heart pounding, looking for tracks, for any sign that anyone or anything had been there. There was nothing. The damp earth was undisturbed, save for my own boot prints. The leaves were a pristine, untrampled carpet. It was as if the whistling had been a phantom, a broadcast from another dimension that had left no trace on this one. But the memory of it was burned into my mind. It was real, and the journal on my chest was proof that it was not the first time it had visited this clearing. With my pack shouldered, I took one last look at the Oakhaven Creek campsite, this small, insignificant patch of dirt that now felt like a place of terrible significance. I felt an overwhelming urge to run, to flee back down the trail to my car and the sane world. But my father's ghost was walking ahead of me, his faded footsteps leading not back, but forward, deeper, higher. Couldn't turn back. The question was too loud now. It demanded an answer. The trail today climbed higher, switchbacking away from the creek and up the spine of the northern ridge. The forest, as if sensing my new resolve and fear, began to transform. The familiar, almost friendly, pines and oaks of the lower valley gave way to a darker, more ancient wood. Gnarled, brooding hemlocks, their bark nearly black with age, dominated the landscape. They were draped in thick curtains of old man's beard moss, which hung from their branches like tattered, gray-green shrouds, swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. The ground beneath my feet changed, too. The soft earth was replaced by a carpet of slick, black stones and dark, twisted roots that clutched at my ankles. The air grew colder, the last vestiges of morning warmth unable to penetrate the dense canopy. The silence was more profound here. It was the deep, sepulchral silence of a place that had not known birdsong for a very, very long time. After an hour of this grueling, uphill climb, I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against the trunk of one of the hemlock giants. The silence pressed in. I felt an acute, piercing loneliness, a sense of being the only living, breathing thing for miles. It was a hostile feeling. To distract myself, to ground myself in my purpose, I pulled out the journal. My father's entry for the second day. His handwriting, though still neat, had lost its placid confidence. October 4th, 1999. 0900 hours. Leaving Oakhaven. No sleep. The whistling stopped just before dawn. The smell is stronger this morning. Heading up to Sentinel Rock. The woods feel wrong. Sick. The birds are gone. I haven't seen a squirrel or a chipmunk since yesterday. It feels like the life is being systematically drained from this valley. This isn't a natural cycle. This feels targeted. 1,400 hours. Something new. There are symbols carved into the trees. Not trail markers from the service. I've never seen this marking before. They're complex. A perfect circle with a stark, vertical line cutting through its center. At the base of the line where it exits the circle, there are three smaller, precise circles like roots or droplets. I've seen it on 3 trees now, always on the north-facing side. They look fresh. The sap is still weeping from the cuts. It feels like I'm being followed and marked, or else guided toward something. I don't know which is worse. Symbols. My pace quickened, a new, morbid curiosity overriding some of my fear. My mission now had a tangible goal. I wasn't just walking a path. I was hunting for clues. I began to scan every tree trunk, my eyes tracing the rough, dark bark. For a mile, I saw nothing but the endless, repeating pattern of hemlock and moss. I started to wonder if maybe they had been on trees that had since fallen, or if the bark had healed over them, erasing the evidence. Maybe my father, sleep-deprived and terrified, had started to see patterns in the natural grain of the wood. And then I saw one. It was on my left, about 20 feet off the trail, carved into the dark bark of a massive, ancient hemlock. My heart leaped into my throat. It was exactly as he described. Unmistakable. A circle, perhaps 8 inches in diameter, carved with a steady, confident hand. A stark, vertical line dissected it with geometric precision. And at its base, 3 small, perfect circles. It wasn't graffiti. It wasn't a casual carving of initials. The cuts were too deliberate, too clean. It felt ancient, ritualistic. It radiated a kind of quiet, malevolent purpose. I left the trail and pushed through the damp ferns, my boots sinking into the soft, black soil. I reached out and touched it. The sap was no longer fresh, of course. The carving was old, the wood inside the cuts scarred and gray, weathered by 20 years of snow and rain. But it was real. It was here. A shiver, cold and electric, traced its way down my spine. This isn't just a story in a book. It's a real place, a real sequence of events. And I'm walking right into the middle of it, 20 years to the day. The feeling of being on a stage, reenacting a play, returned with suffocating force. I found 2 more symbols over the next hour. Each one was identical. Each one was carved into a large, prominent tree. And each one, as my father had noted, was on the north-facing side of the trunk. They were markers. They were leading me deeper, higher. They were leading me toward Sentinel Rock. Late in the afternoon, after hours of climbing through that dark, silent forest, the trees finally began to thin. The oppressive canopy peeled back, and I emerged, blinking, into the daylight onto a wide, granite outcrop. This had to be it. Sentinel Rock. It was a massive granite formation that jutted out from the mountainside like the prow of some colossal stone ship. The view was staggering. The entire Kawano Valley spread out below me like a dark green ocean, vast and utterly indifferent to my existence. I could trace the path of the creek I had camped at, a thin silver ribbon in a sea of green. I felt impossibly small, a solitary, fragile speck in a world that didn't know or care that I was there. My father's plan had been to make his second camp here. He had described a small, sheltered overhang at the base of the main rock face. I scanned the area, and I saw it easily a natural alcove in the granite, a shallow cave protected from the wind and rain. As I approached it, my heart began to pound a heavy, frantic rhythm against my ribs. It was a perfect campsite, and inside my world stopped. There was a fire pit just like at Oakhaven, a ring of blackened stones. And resting on one of those stones, nestled in the moss as if it had been placed there just yesterday, was a small, rusted tin mug. I fell to my knees, my breath catching in a sob. My fingers trembled as I reached out and picked it up. It was an old-style enamel mug, the kind my father always used. It was dark blue with a chipped white rim. I turned it over in my hands. And there, on the bottom, scratched crudely into the metal with what must have been the point of a knife, were the initials TT. Thomas Thorne. He left it here. 20 years ago he sat in this very spot, in this very alcove, and he drank from this mug. And then he left it behind. The question screamed in my mind. Why? My father was meticulous. He was a professional. A ranger never left gear behind. It was the cardinal sin. It meant you were careless, or it meant you had to leave in a hurry. A very great hurry. I sat down hard on the cold stone floor of the alcove, my back against the unyielding granite, cradling the mug in my hands as if it were the most precious artifact on earth. It was the first tangible piece of him I had found. Not a memory, not a story, but a physical object. Proof. He was here. He was real. And he was scared enough to leave this behind. The sun began its slow descent, and the reality of spending a night in this exposed, haunted place began to settle upon me. I pulled out the journal, the discovery of the mug lending a terrible, new weight to his already frightening words. October 4th, 1999. 1800 hours. Camp at Sentinel Rock. The view from up here, it doesn't feel beautiful. Feels like I'm being watched by the whole valley. I feel exposed like an insect on a plate. The symbols are everywhere on the rock face of the Sentinel, almost invisible unless the light hits them just right. I've counted 13 of them. The smell is very strong now. It's drifting up from the gorge to the east. The gorge the trail leads down into tomorrow. I looked at the rock face around my shelter. He was right. Now that the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows, I could see them, faintly etched into the surface of the granite, weathered by 20 years of wind and ice, but still there. The same malevolent geometry, circle, line, 3 dots, over and over, a silent, repeating scream carved in stone. I forced myself to eat, but the food tasted like ash. The sun set, painting the clouds in fiery, bloody strokes of orange and crimson. It wasn't beautiful. It looked like a wound opening in the sky. And as the last sliver of light vanished behind the distant, jagged peaks, a new sound began. It wasn't whistling. It was a clicking sound, a series of sharp, hard clicks, like 2 pieces of flint or bone being struck together. The sound was rhythmic, but unnervingly irregular. Click, 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 click. It echoed in the open air, making it impossible to pinpoint the source, but the general direction was clear. It was coming from the gorge, the direction I was headed tomorrow. My blood ran cold. I remembered another piece of wilderness lore my father had taught me, that mountain lions can sometimes make a clicking or chittering sound with their teeth as a territorial warning or a call. But this was too loud, too resonant. It didn't sound like it was coming from a throat. It sounded mechanical, yet organic. It echoed off the rock face, sounding like it was coming from a dozen places at once. My fear was a physical thing now, a cold, heavy knot in my stomach. I reached for the journal, my only source of counsel, my only friend in this terrifying place. His last entry for the day was short, and the handwriting was a mess, the letters shaky and compressed, as if he was trying to write in a very small space. October 4th, 1999. 2,200 hours. It's making noises, a chittering, clicking sound. It's not an animal I know. It's been going for hours. It's testing the perimeter. I saw it, just for a second. A shadow at the edge of the firelight. It was wrong. The shape was wrong. Too tall. Too thin. The old stories have another rule. The rangers who have been here for 40 years, the ones who talk to the tribal elders, they know it. Do not show your face to the moon when the clicking begins. I don't know what it means, but I've pulled my tarp low over the entrance of the alcove. I will not look at the sky. My head snapped up. The moon, a perfect, brilliant silver disk, was rising over the opposite ridge, bathing the entire landscape in an ethereal, ghostly white light. And I was sitting in the open mouth of the alcove, my face fully exposed to its cold, silent gaze. At that exact moment, the clicking from the gorge suddenly, utterly stopped. The silence that followed was 100 times worse than the noise. Felt heavy, felt personal. It felt like the silence of something that has stopped making noise because it has spotted its prey. It has seen you. A wave of pure, animal panic crashed over me. I scrambled backward, crab-walking into the deepest darkness of the rock alcove, dragging my pack and my sleeping bag with me. I didn't bother setting anything up. I just yanked my sleeping bag out of its stuffed sack and threw it over myself, creating a makeshift, pathetic burrow against the back wall of stone. I lay there, in the absolute, suffocating blackness, my breath hitching in my chest, my face pressed against the cold, unyielding granite. I do not look at the moon. I do not make a sound. I just wait, and I listen. And through the frantic pounding of my own blood in my ears, I hear a new sound. The soft, deliberate crunch of something heavy, walking on the loose granite just outside my shelter. The footsteps, slow, heavy, and sickeningly deliberate, they circled my small shelter for what felt like an entire lifetime. Each crunch of gravel on the granite outside was not just a sound. It was a hammer blow against my sanity. It wasn't the sound of a bear or a cougar. Animals have a rhythm, a cadence born of instinct. This was the sound of something thinking, something patient. It would take 3 steps, then pause, the silence stretching for an unbearable length of time, as if it were listening for a whimper, for a single sign of the terrified prey it knew was hiding just feet away. I lay under my sleeping bag, my body rigid, a cold sweat pasting my shirt to my skin. I was convinced that at any moment a hand or something shaped like a hand, something long and thin like the shadows my father described, would reach in and rip the covering away. My mind, no longer my own, became a theater for atrocity, projecting horrific images onto the black screen of the alcove's interior. I thought about the shape he described. Too tall, too thin. My imagination, fueled by pure, unadulterated terror, conjured images of a creature made of mismatched limbs and unnatural angles, a silhouette of wrongness against the pale moonlight. Then, after an age, the footsteps receded. The deliberate crunching grew fainter, moving away from my shelter, back towards the gorge. The silence that returned was a changed thing. It was no longer the expectant silence of the hunt. It was the empty, sterile silence of a room after a predator has just left, its scent still lingering in the air. I stayed in my pathetic hiding spot, not daring to move, not daring to believe it was over. Sleep was a country I had no passport for. My mind was a border patrolled by fear. I waited until the first hint of morning light, a weak, apologetic gray that did little to dispel the gloom. When I finally found the courage to emerge, blinking into the pale dawn, the world was gone. It had been swallowed by a thick, cold, white mist. It clung to everything, muffling all sound and reducing visibility to less than 30 feet. The grand, sweeping vista from yesterday was gone, replaced by a claustrophobic, suffocating world of gray. It felt like the valley was deliberately hiding its face from me. I scanned the ground around the alcove. There were no tracks. Of course there were no tracks. Just the endless, indifferent stone, now slick with condensation. It was as if the night had been nothing more than a fever dream. But the terror was real, and my father's rusted mug, which I now packed away as if it were a sacred relic, was proof that this dream had a history. Today's trail led down from the relative openness of Sentinel Rock and into the very maw that had birthed the clicking sounds of the night. The gorge, the place my father had called the gut. As I descended, the narrow trail becoming a slick and treacherous ledge, the mist grew thicker, and the air grew colder. And the smell, my God, the smell. My father was right. In the clearing, it had been faint, a spoiled undertone. Here, descending into the gorge, it became a presence. It was the smell of ozone, sharp and metallic like after a lightning strike, but woven through with something else, something deeply and anciently foul. It was the scent of old blood, of decay, of fear. It was a scent that caught in the back of my throat and made my eyes water. It grew stronger with every downward step I took, a foul, invisible miasma rising from the depths. The path became a true test of nerve, a narrow ledge barely 2 feet wide, cut into the side of a sheer cliff face. To my right, a solid wall of weeping black rock. To my left, a swirling white void of mist. Far below, I could hear the muted roar of a powerful river, the sound of it echoing up from the unseen depths. The gorge was a wound in the earth, and I was climbing down into its infected heart. And the symbols were here, too, carved into the rock wall beside the path. Circle, line, 3 dots. They were more numerous now, closer together, no longer just markers. They felt like a frantic, repeating warning, a desperate litany scrawled by countless lost souls. Go back, go back, go back. But my father hadn't gone back. The journal was clear about that, so I couldn't either. I had to stop frequently, my legs trembling not just from the exertion but from the sheer vertigo. During one of these stops, I leaned my back against the cold, damp rock wall and consulted the journal again. I needed to hear his voice, even if it was just on paper. His entry from this part of the journey was chilling. October 5th, 1999. 1,000 hours. I'm in the gorge. The locals call it the gut. Aptly named. I feel like I'm being digested. The fog is so thick I can barely see the trail 10 feet in front of me. The stench is almost unbearable. It's a slaughterhouse. That's what it smells like. An old, cold slaughterhouse where the fear of the animals has soaked into the very stone. The clicking is gone, but there's a new sound. A low hum. It feels like it's coming from the rocks themselves, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. I can feel it in my teeth. I froze. I closed my eyes and concentrated, tuning out the roar of the river. And I felt it. A low-frequency vibration. A deep bass thrum that was more a feeling than a sound. It resonated in my bones. A steady, monotonous drone that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the mountain. It was not the river. It was too steady, too perfect. It was the sound of immense power held in check. The sound of a vast machine or a vast and sleeping god. I kept walking, my hand now trailing along the cold, damp rock wall for balance and for a semblance of security. The mist swirled around me, creating ghostly shapes that danced and writhed at the very edge of my vision. My nerves were shredded. Every shadow was a figure. Every gust of wind that swirled up from the chasm was a whisper. Around what I judged to be midday, I came upon it. The path rounded a sharp, blind bend, and there, in a slightly wider part of the ledge, was a backpack. It was an old, faded canvas and leather external frame pack, the kind they issued to rangers in the 90s. It was leaning against the rock wall, perfectly placed, as if its owner had just set it down for a moment to rest and take in the view of you that didn't exist in the thick fog. The pack was streaked with green mildew and half covered in creeping moss, but it was unmistakably my father's. My breath caught in my throat, a painful, hitching gasp. I approached it with the slow, reverent steps of a pilgrim approaching a holy shrine. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The leather straps were cracked and brittle with age. The canvas, once a utilitarian forest green, had faded to a pale, ghostly seafoam color. I knelt in front of it. With trembling, clumsy fingers, I unbuckled the main flap. The metal of the buckle was cold and gritty with corrosion. Inside, things were neatly packed, a testament to the kind of man he was even in his final hours. A spare wool sweater folded perfectly, a small, comprehensive first aid kit, a bag of trail mix, the nuts and raisins now a single petrified clump, and tucked into a side pocket, a small, waterproof Pelican box. My fingers shook as I worked the latch on the box. Popped open with a faint hiss. Inside, nestled in the foam padding, was his spare compass, a book of waterproof matches, and a single folded photograph. With infinite care, I picked up the photograph and unfolded it. The paper was stiff and delicate. It was a picture of my mother, young and vibrant, her hair cut in a style from the late 70s, smiling a brilliant, genuine smile. And she was holding me. I was a toddler, no more than 3 years old, sitting on her lap. I was wearing a tiny toy ranger hat that had been a gift from my father. A wave of grief so powerful it felt like a physical blow washed over me, buckling my knees. I knelt there on that cold, misty ledge, 20 years of suppressed loss, of unanswered pain, crashing down on me all at once. Hot tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the faded canvas of his pack. This was not an artifact. This was his life. This was our life. And he left it here. The question screamed again, louder this time. Why? You don't leave your pack. You don't leave your supplies. And you never, ever leave this photograph behind. You leave this if you are shedding your life. You leave this if you are disarming yourself. Or you leave this if you know with absolute certainty that you aren't coming back. With a growing sense of cold, dreadful finality, I pulled out the journal. It was time to read on. His handwriting now was barely legible, a frantic, desperate scrawl that clawed across the page, the pen strokes digging deep into the paper. October 5th, 1999. 1,400 hours. I left my pack. It's too heavy. It's too loud. I only need the journal now. The humming, it's louder. It's a song. Terrible, silent song. And it's pulling me forward. The smell, I know what it is now. It's not just decay. It's the smell of fear itself. Not my fear. Old fear. The distilled terror of every animal, every person that has ever died in this place. It soaks the rocks. It rises from the river. It feeds something. I have to know what's at the end of this gorge. There's a cabin marked on the old pre-park service maps. A trapper's cabin, abandoned for nearly a century. The humming is coming from there. I feel it. It's a nexus, a focal point. I have to see it. I understand now. There's a new rule. The last rule. I feel like I've known it all along, deep in my bones. Do not carry your past with you into the heart of the woods. My pack, my supplies, my photos, my old life, it's the past. I have to leave it. It's a toll, an offering, to be allowed to approach. The last rule. Chills racked my body. A violent, uncontrollable shiver. I looked at my own pack, my expensive modern pack, filled with my gear, my food, my own past. The entity in these woods, whatever it was intelligent. It demanded things. It demanded you follow its twisted, nonsensical rules. It demanded you shed your identity, your history, your very self. In that moment, I made a decision. It was a terrible, irrational, insane decision that felt, in that cold and humming place, like the only sane thing left to do. I was not an observer anymore. I was a participant. I took my father's pack. I emptied my own pack of everything but the barest essentials. A small amount of food, my water filter, my sleeping bag, my headlamp, the journal, and my father's mug. I left my modern, expensive backpack there on the ledge, next to where his head sat for 20 years. A strange, silent monument to my own spiraling sanity. I shrugged on my father's old, musty pack. The brittle leather straps creaked. It smelled of mildew and time. Felt right. It felt like I was finally in step with him, walking the same path, bearing the same burdens, stripped down to the same essential core. I turned and continued my descent into the gorge, into the heart of the hum. The mist was so thick now that I could only see a few feet ahead. The world was reduced to the narrow path, the weeping rock wall, and the swirling gray void to my left. The humming grew in intensity, a physical pressure against my eardrums, a vibration that made the world seem unstable, unreal. And then I heard it, a sound that cut through the fog, through the roar of the river, through the humming of the rock. A voice. It was faint, distorted by the mist and the confounding echoes of the gorge. But it was clear. It was calling my name. Alex. It was my father's voice. Alex. Alex. The voice. It was undeniably my father's. It was the same warm, gentle timbre that had read me bedtime stories until I was too old to admit I still liked them. The same patient tone that had taught me how to tie a figure-8 knot and how to identify poison ivy. It echoed through the gorge, a phantom sound from a life I thought was long since buried. For a single, blinding moment, logic and reason were incinerated by a supernova of impossible hope. Was it possible? Could he have survived all these years? A wild man of the woods, a hermit hidden from a world that had declared him dead? Had he been trapped here, and was my arrival some kind of long-awaited rescue? The questions bloomed in my mind, a garden of desperate, beautiful fantasies. "Dad!" I called out, my voice raw and cracking, a pathetic, hopeful sound that was immediately swallowed by the oppressive mist. "Dad, is that you?" "I'm here." The only answer was the deep, vibrating hum from the rocks beneath my feet and the indifferent roar of the hidden river. The voice did not come again, and just as quickly as the hope had flared, it was extinguished, leaving behind the cold, black ash of reality. It was a trick, an auditory hallucination brought on by exhaustion, stress, and grief. The complex acoustics of the gorge, the wind, my own desperate wanting, my rational mind, fighting for purchase on the slippery cliff face of my sanity, knew this. But my heart, the treacherous organ, had heard what it heard, and the sound, trick or not, had done its job. It had pulled me forward. I pushed on, the humming growing in intensity with every step. It was a physical pressure now, a weight against my eardrums, a vibration that seemed to be shaking my skeleton apart from the inside. The air, thick with that foul stench of ozone and old fear, was becoming difficult to breathe. It felt like I was wading through the very medium of dread. And then, the fog, which had been an impenetrable wall, began to thin. As if on cue, a silent wind seemed to peel back a layer of the mist, like a theater curtain being drawn back for the final, terrible act. And through the swirling gray, I saw it. Just as the journal had predicted. The cabin. It was slumped against the sheer gorge wall, a dilapidated structure of dark, rot-blackened logs, half swallowed by the encroaching wilderness. It didn't look like it had been built so much as it looked like it had grown there, a cancerous tumor on the face of the mountain. The roof sagged deeply in the middle, threatening imminent collapse. A single, square window, dark and devoid of glass, stared out into the mist like the vacant eye socket of a skull. It looked ancient, a fossil from a forgotten, more brutal time. And the humming, the terrible, bone-jarring hum, it was centered here. This was the source. This was the dark heart. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I stumbled the last 100 feet. The ground around the cabin was bare, a patch of unnaturally sterile, black earth where nothing grew. The door, made of thick, crude planks, hung askew on a single groaning leather hinge. And the wood of the cabin itself, it was covered in them. The symbols, they were carved everywhere, not with the neat, deliberate placement I had seen on the trees and rocks, but with a frantic, overlapping chaos. Hundreds of them, one carved on top of the other, a desperate, maddening tapestry of circles and lines. It looked like someone had been trying to ward something off, or perhaps, with dawning horror I realized, trying to keep something in. I stood before the dark, gaping doorway, my father's old pack a strange weight on my shoulders, his journal clutched in my hand like a useless shield. My body was screaming at me to run, to turn around and flee this accursed place. But my father had come this far. He had stood on this same patch of dead earth. He had faced the same dark doorway, and he had gone inside. I had to know why. I opened the journal one last time, my only connection to his final moments of clarity. I read his final, coherent entry, his words now a desperate whisper from the past directly into my ear. October 5th, 1999. 1,600 hours. I'm at the cabin. The humming is inside. It's alive. I know what this place is now. It's not a cabin. It's a trap. Or a lure. The symbols aren't a warning. They are a name. This is its den. I should not have come. But I have to see. I have to understand what has been hunting this valley. I am a ranger. It is my duty to know. I'm going inside. Forgive me, Mary. Tell Alex. The sentence was never finished. His duty. My father was a man of immense, unshakable duty. It was that sense of duty that had forced him to take that final, fatal step. And now it was my love for him, my own desperate, filial duty to find the truth of his end, that had led me to the same precipice. I took a deep breath, the foul air searing my lungs like acid, and I stepped through the doorway. The instant I crossed the threshold, the world changed. The air inside was frigid, a deep, unnatural, cellar-like cold that had nothing to do with the mountain weather. It leached the warmth from my body instantly, and the humming, it was deafening in here, an overwhelming, skull-rattling drone that made my vision swim and my teeth ache with a painful, sympathetic vibration. My headlamp cut a sharp, white beam through the oppressive gloom. The inside of the cabin was a single, small, square room, and it was surprisingly, terrifyingly bare. There was no furniture, no rusted stove, no rotted bed frame, no sign that a trapper had ever lived and died here. The floor was just packed earth, cold and damp. The walls were bare logs. My beam swept across the floor, and then it stopped. My blood ran cold. In the center of the room was a pile of objects. They were small, personal effects, lying in a heap like the contents of 100 emptied pockets. A silver pocket watch, its chain rusted into a solid knot. A woman's silver locket, tarnished jet black. A child's small leather shoe, the buckle eaten away by corrosion. A pair of wire-rimmed spectacles, one lens cracked neatly in half. A tarnished silver crucifix. A Boy Scout compass. Dozens of them. They were offerings, tributes, the last vestiges of other people, other lives, who had been drawn into this gorge, who had walked this same path and never walked out. How many people had this valley consumed? My shaky beam of light continued its journey, tracing the interior walls. The symbols were carved here, too, just as they were outside. But between them, something else. Scratched frantically into the logs with a nail or a rock or a shard of bone were words, names, dates, a guest book for the damned. Elias Vance, prospector, 1972. It watches from the trees. Sarah Jane, 1981. I can't find the trail back. Lost. So lost. It sees me when I sleep. Don't listen to the voices. My light found a fresher set of scratches, near the back wall. They were lower down, near the floor, as if carved by someone kneeling, someone weak and drained of all hope. The letters were shaky, but the name was unmistakable. E. Thorn. October 5th, 1999. I am sorry. It is a shepherd, and it is always hungry. I stared at his name, at his final message. My father's last will and testament, scratched into the wall of his tomb. A shepherd? What did it mean? My mind reeled, trying to grasp the significance of the word. The humming intensified, the pressure inside my skull building until I thought I would scream or my head would simply burst. And then, with a suddenness that was more shocking than the sound itself, the humming stopped. In the absolute, ringing silence that followed, a silence so profound it felt like a physical blow, I heard a new sound. A soft, wet, tearing sound. It came from the darkest corner of the cabin, a space to my left that my headlamp beam hadn't yet touched. I forced my head to turn, to aim the light. My hand was shaking so violently the beam danced and skittered across the wall. A frantic, terrified insect of light. The beam landed on it, and my mind simply broke. I have no words in the human language to adequately describe what I saw. My father's words were the only ones that came close, and they were a profound, pathetic understatement. Too tall, too thin. It was hunched in the corner, as if it had been waiting patiently in the shadows for me the entire time. It unfolded itself upwards, impossibly tall, its limbs moving with a slow, fluid grace that bent at angles that were deeply, fundamentally wrong for any creature born of this earth. Its skin was the color of old bruises, a mottled landscape of pale lavender and sickly gray, stretched taut over a frame that seemed to be made of knotted, polished wood and bone. It had no face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a smooth, blank expanse of pale flesh, like an unfinished ceramic doll, that tilted towards me with an unnerving, inquisitive grace. But that wasn't the source of the tearing sound. The creature was holding something in its long, spindly, multi-jointed fingers. It was a deer, or what was left of one. But it was not eating the deer in any way I could comprehend. There was no blood, no chewing. The flesh of the animal was simply melting, dissolving into the creature's fingers, drawing up into its arm like liquid being sucked through a straw, leaving behind a dry, crumbling husk of bone and fur. As my light hit it, the creature paused its grotesque meal, its featureless face tilted directly towards me. It didn't have eyes, but I felt its gaze. It was a cold, ancient, appraising stare that bypassed my own eyes and looked directly into the terrified, screaming core of my soul. It saw my fear. It saw my grief. It saw the ghost of my father that I carried with me, and it seemed to savor it. The smell, the ozone, the decay, the fear it was pouring off this thing in waves. This was the source. This was the heart of the wrongness that permeated the entire valley. I was paralyzed. My body refused all commands. My lungs refused to breathe. My heart had seized. This was it. The end. I was just another offering. My name would not even make it to the wall. The creature slowly, deliberately, let the dry husk of the deer drop to the packed earth floor, where it crumbled into dust. It raised one of its impossibly long, thin arms and pointed a finger at me. The finger was like a sharpened twig. And then it spoke. It didn't speak with a voice. The sound did not enter my ears. The words simply appeared inside my own head. A dry, rasping, ancient whisper that was not my own thoughts, violating the sanctuary of my mind. You carry his scent, the thought voice whispered, each word a dry rustle of dead leaves. You followed the path. You learned the rules. You left your past on the cliffside. My father's backpack felt like it was suddenly on fire against my skin. I had done everything right. I had followed his footsteps perfectly. I had passed the tests, but I had misunderstood the entire purpose of the exam. It wasn't a test to see if I could survive. It was an application, an interview. The creature took a slow, silent step towards me, its strange feet making no sound on the earthen floor. The shepherd needs a new crook, the voice in my head rasped. The flock is scattered and the old one is broken. It was then I finally understood my father's last message and the full, unimaginable scope of the horror of this place. It is a shepherd, and it is always hungry. This thing, this ancient, impossible horror, it wasn't just a mindless predator. It was a caretaker, a tender of this dark, haunted valley. It culled the life here, it fed on the emotion, the fear, the life force, maintaining some kind of terrible alien balance. And my father hadn't been eaten. He hadn't just been killed. He had been chosen. He had been recruited. He had become its tool. The whistler in the dark at Oakhaven. The footsteps on the granite at Sentinel Rock. The voice in the fog calling my name. He, or the thing he had become, had been the one guiding me, testing me, preparing me for this very moment. The creature took another silent step. It was so close now I could smell the cold earth and ancient, mineral decay that clung to it like a shroud. Your father grew tired, the voice whispered inside my skull, and for a moment I detected a hint of something that might have been ancient pity, or perhaps just cold, clinical amusement. His grief was a bitter meal, and it wore him thin. He is at rest now, scattered back into the silence. But the valley must be tended. The echoes must be heard. There must always be a ranger in this forest. It raised its long, twig-like hand, reaching for my face. And that's when my paralysis broke. The pure, animal instinct for survival, a force more powerful than any conscious thought, detonated in my limbs. I didn't scream. The sound was a hard knot trapped in my throat. I just turned and ran. I scrambled out of that cabin of horrors, not looking back, my father's old pack bouncing wildly, a mocking burden on my back. I ran blindly down the trail, stumbling over rocks, scraping my hands raw against the cliff face, my lungs burning as if I were inhaling fire. I didn't care about the fog, the treacherous path, the river roaring in the void below. The only thing that mattered was putting distance between myself and that shepherd. I ran until my legs gave out, until my vision swam with black spots, until I collapsed in a heap onto the muddy trail, miles from the cabin. I lay there, gasping, sobbing, my mind a shattered wreck of the man who had entered the woods 3 days ago. And as I lay there, broken and weeping, I heard it, echoing faintly from the gorge far behind me. A soft, tuneless whistle. It was the same whistle from the first night. But this time I knew who it was, or rather what it was. It wasn't a monster hunting me. It was the valley's new ranger, the shepherd, whistling a quiet, meandering tune as it began its lonely patrol. It was whistling me farewell. I don't know how long I lay there, a broken thing on the forest floor. Minutes? Hours? Time had lost all meaning. My body was a spent cartridge, an empty vessel of adrenaline and terror. The flight from the cabin wasn't a calculated retreat. It was a blind, animalistic panic. I have fractured memories of it, like frames from a shattered film. The searing pain in my lungs, the slap of wet branches against my face, the feeling of my legs churning through mud and over rocks without conscious command. I remember falling, getting up, and falling again. My father's old pack a leaden weight, a mocking reminder of the legacy I had just witnessed. But as I lay there, something began to change. The forest itself felt different. The oppressive, watchful silence was gone. The deep, bone-rattling hum had ceased. The foul, electric scent of ozone and fear had dissipated from the air. replaced by the clean, honest smell of damp earth, pine, and wet stone. It was as if a great and terrible storm had finally passed. The presence, the intelligence that had saturated the entire valley, had withdrawn its attention. The shepherd had found its new crook, its purpose fulfilled. I was no longer part of the equation. I was just a man, alone in the woods. And that simple fact, the return to a normal, indifferent wilderness, was almost as terrifying as the focused malevolence that had preceded it. I was beneath its notice now. I had been dismissed. Slowly, painfully, I got to my feet. Every muscle screamed in protest. My hands were scraped raw, my knees bruised and bloody. The journey back was a blur of mindless, zombie-like motion. I didn't consult the map. I didn't need to. I just put one foot in front of the other, moving away from the gorge, away from the heart of the wrongness. The forest remained silent, but it was a natural silence now. The quiet of a place that holds no great secrets, only the small, everyday dramas of life and death. I saw a squirrel chatter at me from a branch. A pair of jays screeched in the canopy above. These simple, mundane sounds, which I had taken for granted my entire life, now felt like a profound and welcome miracle. They were the sounds of a world that was not being actively muted by an ancient, hungry god. I walked for what must have been 2 more days. I ate what little food I had left without tasting it. I drank from streams without bothering to filter the water. My survival instinct now a low, flickering candle in the hurricane of my memory. I did not sleep. When darkness fell, I would simply sit with my back against a tree, my arms wrapped around my knees, and I would stare into the blackness, waiting for the dawn, my mind replaying the scene in that cabin on an endless, horrific loop. The featureless face, the dissolving deer, the voice inside my head. On the 3rd day after fleeing the cabin, I stumbled out of the treeline. The sudden, bright sunlight of the outside world was a physical blow. The sight of the gravel parking lot, the asphalt of the access road, my own dust-covered carrot all seemed like a hallucination, a flimsy stage set from a world I no longer belonged to. A lone hiker, a young woman with a bright purple backpack, was just getting out of her car. She looked up and saw me. The cheerful smile on her face vanished, replaced by a look of shock, then pity, then fear. I can only imagine what she saw. A man, gaunt and skeletal, his face hollowed out by sleeplessness and terror. My clothes were torn and caked with mud. A wild, haunted look in my eyes. I probably looked like a ghost, a piece of the dark woods that had broken off and drifted into the light. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking. Are you okay, sir?" she stammered. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't answer. I just stared at her clean clothes, her healthy complexion, her easy confidence. She belonged to a world that no longer had a place for me. I think I tried to speak, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. The authorities arrived less than an hour later. Park rangers first, then a county sheriff's deputy. They wrapped me in a blanket, gave me water. They spoke to me in slow, soothing tones, the way you speak to a frightened animal or a traumatized child. They asked me my name. "Alex Thorne?" I whispered, my own name sounding alien on my tongue. The older ranger's eyes widened slightly. He knew the name. Thorne. He looked at the trail I had just emerged from. He looked at my haunted face. And I saw in his eyes a flicker of something, not just pity, but a kind of deep ancestral dread. The debriefing happened in a small, sterile office at the park's main ranger station. The smell of antiseptic and stale coffee was a jarring contrast to the rich, organic smells of the forest. The sheriff, a portly man named Deputy Miller, was gentle but firm. He had the official report of my father's disappearance on the table in front of him. "So, Alex," he began, his voice laced with a practiced, professional sympathy. "You were in there for 5 days. Your trip plan said you were only equipped for 3. You were reported missing yesterday. Can you tell me what happened?" What could I say? What words exist to describe what I had experienced? I looked at his kind, pragmatic face, at the fluorescent lights humming overhead, at the photos of smiling rangers on the wall. I was back in the world of logic, of cause and effect, of police reports and rational explanations. To tell him the truth would be to sign my own committal papers. They would call it a psychotic break, severe trauma manifesting as elaborate hallucinations. They would lock me away in a quiet, padded room. And the truth, the real, terrible truth, would be buried forever. So I lied. I constructed a plausible narrative from the shattered pieces of my experience. I told them I had become disoriented after the first day, that I had lost the trail in the heavy fog on the ridges. I told them I had run out of food and that dehydration had set in. I described seeing and hearing things, shadows in the woods, strange noises. I let them lead me, let them fill in the blanks with their own logical conclusions. "It sounds like a classic case of exposure-induced delirium," the deputy said, nodding sagely. "The mind plays terrible tricks on you when you're pushed to the limit. It's what we think happened to your father. He got caught in that freak storm, got lost, and his mind just broke down. And there it was, the final bitter irony. In order to protect myself, in order to remain a part of the sane world, I had to betray my father. I had to validate the very lie that had covered up his true fate for 20 years. I had to take his final, desperate testimony, his warning written in a frantic scrawl in his journal, and dismiss it as the ravings of a madman. The guilt of that lie was a heavier weight than any pack, a colder dread than any nocturnal footstep. I nodded, my eyes downcast. "Yes," I mumbled. I think that's what happened. They found the journal, of course. They read the final entries, and they saw exactly what the investigators had seen 20 years before, confirmation of their theory. They saw my journey as a tragic, grief-fueled pilgrimage that had almost ended the same way. A son, obsessed with his father's death, succumbing to the same delusions in the same location. It was a neat, tidy, psychological narrative. It made perfect sense. They returned the journal to me a week later, along with my father's mug, treating them as the sad relics of a family tragedy. They put me on a mandatory psychological leave from my own job. They told me to rest, to recover, to let the ghosts of the past go. But I can't. I am home now. I am safe. I live in a city apartment where the only sounds are the hum of the refrigerator and the distant siren's wail. But I am more haunted now than I ever was on that trail. The silence of my apartment at 3 a.m. is not empty. It is the waiting silence of Oakhaven. The reflection I see in a dark window is not my own. It is a tall, thin shape, a featureless face. The ordinary world has been rendered a thin veneer, a fragile curtain over a stage of profound and ancient horror. I know what walks in the deep, silent places of the world, and that knowledge is a poison that has no antidote. I still have the artifacts, my father's journal, his pack, his mug. They sit in a locked trunk in my closet. I don't look at them, but I know they're there. They are not mementos. They are my burden. They are the proof. And they are a constant reminder of my father's final, terrible promotion. He is not dead. He is not at peace. He is a ranger, and his patrol is eternal. For months I did nothing. I drifted through my life like a ghost. But the silence and the secret began to eat me alive. I couldn't tell the authorities. I couldn't tell my friends. But I had to tell someone. I had to honor his final message. I had to get the warning out. And so, this channel was born. The Wilderness Protocol. I can't give you the truth as fact. The world isn't ready for it. But I can give it to you as a story. I can cloak these truths in the guise of fiction, and I can send them out into the void, like messages in a bottle. I can create a protocol, a set of rules and warnings, for those who might find themselves on the edge of the map, staring into a darkness that stares back. I can tell you these stories so that you might recognize the signs, the unnatural silence, the symbols that are not trail markers, the rules that defy logic. My father's duty was to patrol the wilderness. My duty, the one he passed to me in that terrible cabin, is to patrol the thin border between what we know and what we refuse to believe. The story you've just heard is a work of fiction, a tale crafted to explore the fear of the unknown and the mysteries hidden deep within our planet's wild spaces, that fear that is very real. Thank you for listening to this entry of the Wilderness Protocol. Your time and attention are the most valuable things you can give, and I am grateful for them. If these stories from the edge of the map resonate with you, if you value these expeditions into the dark, please consider supporting the channel. The simplest way to do that is to like this video, as it helps the story find others who need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel to ensure you don't miss future protocols. And if you want to be certain you are alerted when the next transmission is released, click the notification bell. Every bit of support helps me to continue this work, to continue shining a light, however small, into the shadows. Until next time, be safe in your own travels. Be wise in the paths you choose. Question the silence. And whatever you do, stay out of the woods.